Have you ever wondered what the scariest places on Earth are? Today, we will explore the 10 most dangerous prisons in the world, where violence, despair, and brutality exceed any imaginable limit. These places are not just spaces of confinement. They are true hells on Earth, where survival is a daily struggle. Prisons, in essence, should be places of reclusion and ideally rehabilitation. However, in some cases, they become such hostile environments that they seem to come straight out of a nightmare. In these institutions, the line between prisoners and guards often dissolves, leaving only chaos behind. What makes a prison dangerous? Is it the absurd overcrowding, where thousands of inmates are forced to share spaces designed for a few hundred? Or is it the lack of control by authorities, allowing criminal factions to govern the wings like small states within the prison? Perhaps it's the combination of these factors, along with shocking stories that happen every day behind bars. According to recent data, there are over 11 million people imprisoned around the world. In some regions, incarceration rates are alarming, but what really stands out are the extreme conditions in which these inmates live. Some prisons, however, stand out for their extreme levels of danger, violence, and human misery. Understanding these realities helps us reflect on the prison system and its impact on society. Many times, these environments not only fail to fulfill their purpose of rehabilitation, but also perpetuate cycles of violence and social exclusion. From Latin America to Asia, each of these prisons has its own dark story, marked by disturbing accounts that border on the surreal. This video contains real stories that may be disturbing but are important for understanding the dark side of justice. Be prepared to learn about accounts that go beyond imagination and understand what makes these prisons so feared. Our journey begins in the heart of Mexico City, where one of the most dangerous and surreal prisons in the world is located, the San Pedro Penitentiary. Here, the concept of prison as we know it is completely subverted. Founded in 1940, the San Pedro Penitentiary was designed to house about 4,000 inmates. Over the years, however, it became a symbol of the chaotic Mexican prison system, with a population that frequently exceeds 6,000 prisoners. One of the most shocking characteristics of San Pedro is that the inmates themselves control much of the internal functioning of the prison. From cell administration to illegal trade, the inmates operate as if they were the owners of the place. Imagine a space designed for 4 people now housing 20 or more inmates. This overcrowding not only worsens unsanitary conditions but also intensifies conflicts between rival factions. San Pedro is famous for being a prison where money buys incredible privileges. Wealthy inmates can pay for luxury cells equipped with flat-screen TVs, refrigerators, air conditioning, and even access to drugs and alcohol. While some inmates live in cells that resemble high-end apartments, others are forced to sleep in crowded hallways without access to basic items like mattresses or adequate food. This stark contrast is a reflection of the social inequality that permeates all of Mexican society. Despite the luxury available to a few, violence is a constant in San Pedro. Criminal factions fight for territory inside the prison, leading to bloody armed confrontations and brutal executions that occur daily. Corruption is so entrenched that guards often turn a blind eye to illegal activities, from drug trafficking to murders. Some employees even actively collaborate with the inmates, receiving bribes to allow weapons and other prohibited items into the facility. Former inmates recount horror stories about how life in San Pedro is a constant struggle for survival. Many say that to avoid being targeted, it was necessary to ally with a faction or pay bribes to the leaders of the pavilion. Inside the prison, there is a parallel economy driven by money, influence, and power. Drugs, weapons, food, and even services like haircuts and massages are openly traded, turning San Pedro into a fully functioning black market. Over the years, Mexican authorities have tried to implement measures to regain control of the prison. However, these initiatives often fail due to resistance from the inmates themselves and the lack of resources to address structural problems. To this day, San Pedro remains one of the most dangerous prisons in the world. Recent reports indicate that violence and corruption remain uncontrollable, putting both inmates and staff at risk. Reflecting on the existence of a prison like San Pedro raises profound questions about the role of the prison system in society. Do these environments truly rehabilitate inmates, or do they merely perpetuate cycles of crime and exclusion? Now that we've explored the dark reality of San Pedro, let's move on to another equally terrifying prison, La Sabanita in Venezuela, where anarchy and brutality reach extreme levels. Our next destination is La Sabanita, a prison located in Barinas, Venezuela. This place is often cited as an extreme example of the collapse of the Venezuelan prison system, where violence, hunger, and anarchy reign supreme. Inaugurated in the 1950s, La Sabanita was designed to house about 700 prisoners. Over the decades, the prison population exploded, reaching alarming numbers. It is estimated that more than 3,700 inmates are currently confined within its overcrowded facilities. Imagine a space built for a few hundred people now housing almost 6 times more inmates. The corridors are filled with makeshift tents, and prisoners sleep in shifts, competing for every inch of available space. In La Sabanita, the state has practically abandoned any attempt at control. Guards are rare and poorly equipped, and they often limit themselves to watching the external gates, leaving the internal pavilions under the absolute dominion of the prisoners themselves. Inside the prison, organized criminal factions exercise absolute power. They control everything from food distribution to conflict resolution, usually through brutal violence. La Sabanita is the scene of frequent clashes between rival factions. Firearms, knives, and even grenades are used in bloody battles that leave dozens dead and injured. Reports indicate that massacres with dozens of victims have occurred in a single day. Hunger and malnutrition are a cruel reality in La Sabanita. Many inmates go days without eating anything other than old rice or scraps sent by relatives. Malnutrition is so severe that some prisoners die of starvation. In addition to hunger, inmates face a lack of potable water, electricity, and basic sanitation. The cells are dirty and disease-ridden, making life inside the prison even more unbearable. Former inmates and visitors recount horror stories about the conditions in La Sabanita. Some mention cases of cannibalism, where desperate prisoners resorted to eating human flesh to survive during periods of extreme hunger. Over the years, Venezuelan authorities promised improvements, but no significant measures were implemented. The country's economic and political crisis makes it even harder to invest in prison infrastructure or ensure minimum security. To this day, La Sabanita remains a symbol of the collapse of the Venezuelan prison system. Recent reports from human rights organizations indicate that conditions remain inhumane, with high mortality and violence rates. The existence of a prison like La Sabanita reflects not only failures in the judicial system but also deep social and economic problems. Poverty, corruption, and the lack of opportunities push thousands of people into crime, perpetuating the cycle of violence. Although San Pedro in Mexico has its own level of chaos, La Sabanita stands out for the complete absence of state control. Here, the state has simply given up fulfilling its role, leaving inmates to their own fate. Now that we've explored La Sabanita, let's move on to another equally terrible prison. ADX Florence in the United States, an institution known as the Alcatraz of the 21st century, where extreme isolation is used as a form of punishment. Our next destination is ADX Florence, located in Colorado, United States. Known as the most secure prison in the world, ADX Florence is designed to keep the most dangerous criminals under absolute control. But does this level of security justify the human costs? Inaugurated in 1994, ADX Florence was built in response to increased violence and riots in other federal prisons in the U.S. The goal was to create a facility where the most problematic inmates could be isolated and controlled without any risk of escape. Every detail of ADX Florence was designed to prevent any escape attempt. The walls are made of reinforced concrete, the doors are bulletproof, and the corridors are monitored by cameras 24 hours a day. To this day, no prisoner has managed to escape. The inmates at ADX Florence spend 23 hours a day locked in their individual cells. These cells are equipped with very few items: a concrete bed, a toilet, and a small window that barely allows a view of the sky. Total control is maintained. All interaction between prisoners and guards is minimal. Meals are delivered through small openings in the doors, and inmates are only allowed out of their cells for 1 hour a day, usually for solitary exercise in courtyards surrounded by high walls. ADX Florence houses some of the most notorious criminals in the world, including Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, Zacarias Moussaoui, a conspirator in the September 11th attacks, and gang leaders like members of the Mexican and Italian mafias. Prolonged isolation has devastating effects on the mental health of inmates. Many report hallucinations, severe depression, and extreme anxiety. Some experts argue that solitary confinement is a form of psychological torture. Human rights organizations harshly criticize ADX Florence, stating that extreme isolation violates basic principles of human dignity. The lack of rehabilitation programs is also pointed out as a serious problem, as these prisoners will hardly get a second chance at life. The daily routine at ADX Florence is rigidly controlled. Prisoners have fixed schedules for everything: meals, showers, exercise, and visits. Even visits are conducted through bulletproof glass, with no physical contact allowed. Despite the extreme control, there have been some attempts at protest or rebellion inside ADX Florence. However, these initiatives were quickly suppressed by guards, who use aggressive containment tactics. The prison uses cutting-edge technology to monitor every movement of the inmates. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, and alarm systems ensure that any abnormal behavior is detected immediately. ADX Florence raises important questions about the balance between public safety and human rights. To what extent is it acceptable to isolate individuals in such severe conditions? And does this really contribute to preventing future crimes? While La Sabanita suffers from chaos and anarchy, ADX Florence represents the opposite extreme: absolute order and total control. Both, however, present serious problems, whether due to lack of supervision or excessive punishment. Now that we've explored ADX Florence, let's move on to another equally dangerous prison: Bang Kwang in Thailand, known as Bangkok Hilton, a place where physical and emotional brutality is part of everyday life. Our next destination is Bang Kwang Prison, located on the outskirts of Bangkok, Thailand. Known as Bangkok Hilton, this place is an extreme example of prison brutality, where inmates face conditions that challenge any notion of human dignity. Founded in 1934, Bang Kwang was designed to be a maximum security prison for the country's most dangerous criminals. Over the years, it gained global notoriety due to its precarious conditions and the cruel treatment imposed on prisoners. The official capacity of the prison is about 3,000 inmates, but it currently houses over 8,000 prisoners. The pavilions are so overcrowded that many inmates are forced to sleep in shifts or in improvised spaces in the corridors. One of the most shocking aspects of Bang Kwang is the permanent use of heavy shackles on all new prisoners during their first 3 months of incarceration. These shackles, weighing up to 5 kilograms, are placed on the ankles and severely limit the mobility of the inmates. Physical and emotional punishments are a constant in Bang Kwang. Physical violence is common, with guards often resorting to beatings as a form of punishment, and prisoners living under the constant threat of attacks by other inmates. Until recently, Bang Kwang was known for conducting public executions of prisoners sentenced to death. Executions were carried out by firing squad, and prisoners knew exactly when their turn would come, increasing fear and despair. In addition to Thais, Bang Kwang houses hundreds of foreign prisoners convicted of serious crimes like drug trafficking. Many of these inmates report additional difficulties, such as language barriers, lack of diplomatic support, and even harsher treatment by guards. Bribery and privileges are common practices in Bang Kwang. Wealthy inmates can pay for better conditions, such as decent food, access to fans, and even protection against attacks. Meanwhile, the poorest are left to fend for themselves. Former foreign inmates recount horror stories about their experiences in Bang Kwang. Some mention going days without proper food, while others describe the feeling of helplessness upon seeing fellow inmates being tortured or executed. The healthcare system in Bang Kwang is practically non-existent. Diseases like tuberculosis and HIV spread rapidly among inmates, and those who fall ill often do not receive adequate treatment. Despite some attempts to improve prison conditions, few significant changes have been implemented. the lack of resources and the neglect of the Thai government continue to perpetuate the cycle of violence and misery. The brutality of Bang Kwang reflects a deeply ingrained punitive mentality in Thai culture, where rehabilitation is seen as a lower priority compared to severe punishment. While ADX Florence uses psychological isolation as a form of control, Bang Kwang applies brutally physical methods. Both, however, share the same core problem: the absence of effective rehabilitation programs. Now that we've explored Bang Kwang, let's move on to another equally dangerous prison: Diyarbakir F-type prison in Turkey, known for its connections to political conflicts and systematic abuses against prisoners. Our next destination is Diyarbakir F-type prison, located in southeastern Turkey. Known for housing political prisoners and Kurdish activists, this institution is a clear reflection of the tension between the Turkish government and ethnic minorities. Inaugurated in 1983, Diyarbakir was designed to be one of the most secure prisons in the country, intended to hold both violent criminals and political dissidents. Over the decades, it became a focal point of international protests due to the abuses committed against its inmates. Most of the prisoners in Diyarbakir are Kurds, members of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, or other groups fighting for the rights of the Kurdish minority. Many were imprisoned without a fair trial or on vague charges of terrorism. Reports of violence in Diyarbakir are alarming. Physical and psychological torture is often used as a method of punishment and coercion. Prolonged solitary confinement, beatings, and electric shocks are some of the tactics reported by former inmates. One particularly cruel aspect of Diyarbakir is the prohibition of cultural expressions. Kurdish prisoners are forbidden from speaking their native language, singing traditional songs, or celebrating cultural events inside the prison. This cultural suppression is seen as a way to annihilate the ethnic identity of the inmates. As a form of protest against inhumane conditions and political repression, prisoners often stage hunger strikes. Some of these strikes lasted weeks or even months, bringing many inmates to the brink of death. Former prisoners recount devastating stories about their experience in Diyarbakir. They mention not only physical violence but also the psychological destruction caused by forced separation from their families, basic deprivations, and constant humiliations. Human rights organizations, such as Amnesty International, have documented numerous cases of abuse in Diyarbakir. Photos and testimonies reveal marks of torture, serious injuries, and evidence of inhumane treatment. Diyarbakir is not just a prison. It is a symbol of political struggle in southeastern Turkey. The imprisonment of Kurdish leaders and activists has been used by the government as a way to silence resistance movements. Turkish authorities maintain strict control over access to information about Diyarbakir. Visits from family members and independent inspectors are extremely limited, making it difficult to verify the actual conditions inside the prison. The existence of a prison like Diyarbakir raises fundamental questions about the role of the judiciary in a democracy. When the state uses penitentiary institutions to repress minorities and dissidents, it is crossing a fine line between public safety and tyranny. While Bang Kwang is marked by widespread physical brutality, Diyarbakir stands out for its political and ideological dimension. Both, however, share the same core problem: the absence of respect for human dignity. To this day, Diyarbakir remains one of the most controversial prisons in the world. Despite international pressure, conditions remain precarious, and abuses against prisoners persist. Now that we've explored Diyarbakir, let's move on to another equally dangerous prison: Black Dolphin in Russia, known as one of the most secure and brutal facilities on the planet, where the worst criminals face extreme punishments. Our next destination is Black Dolphin, located in the remote town of Soleiletsk, Russia. Known as one of the most secure prisons in the world, this facility was designed to keep the worst criminals under absolute control. Here, the concept of freedom is completely nullified. Inaugurated in the 1990s, Black Dolphin was built to replace the outdated Vorkuta prison. Since then, it has become synonymous with maximum security and extreme brutality, housing criminals sentenced to long or life terms. The prison is surrounded by 6-meter-high concrete walls covered with electrified barbed wire. Additionally, watchtowers equipped with elite snipers monitor every movement inside and outside the facility. To this day, No escape attempt has been successful. The inmates at Black Dolphin spend 23 hours a day in tiny cells, with less than 2 square meters of space. The walls are lined with special materials to prevent inmates from communicating via tapping or other methods. All interaction between prisoners and guards is minimal and highly regulated. Meals are delivered through small openings in the doors, and inmates are only allowed out of their cells for 1 hour a day, usually for solitary exercise in courtyards surrounded by high walls. Black Dolphin houses some of the most notorious criminals in Russia, including serial killers like Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard maniac, who murdered dozens of people. Other inmates include organized gang leaders and international traffickers. Punishment in Black Dolphin goes beyond physical confinement. Prisoners report being subjected to constant humiliation, sleep deprivation, and other forms of psychological torture. The idea is to completely break their resistance and will to live. The prison uses cutting-edge technology to monitor every movement of the inmates. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, and alarm systems ensure that any abnormal behavior is detected immediately. Former guards and leaked documents reveal disturbing stories about conditions in Black Dolphin. Some prisoners were found dead in their cells after weeks without anyone noticing, while others reported psychological breakdowns caused by extreme isolation. Unlike other prisons, Black Dolphin does not offer education or work programs. The goal here is not rehabilitation but severe punishment. For many inmates, the only prospect is death. The existence of a prison like Black Dolphin raises important questions about the limits of punishment. Is this level of brutality really necessary? And does society gain anything by treating these individuals like animals? While ADX Florence is also known for its extreme isolation, Black Dolphin stands out for the total absence of hope or opportunities for redemption. Both, however, share the same core problem: the lack of focus on rehabilitation. To this day, Black Dolphin remains one of the most secure and controversial prisons in the world. Despite its efficiency in terms of security, criticisms about its brutal methods persist, and human rights organizations demand urgent changes. Now that we've explored Black Dolphin, let's move on to another equally dangerous prison: El Rodeo in Venezuela, where chaos and violence reach extreme levels. A place where criminal factions rule and the law of the state practically doesn't exist. Our next destination is El Rodeo, one of the most dangerous prisons in Venezuela. Located near Caracas, this institution is a clear reflection of the total collapse of the Venezuelan prison system. Here, the state has completely lost control and criminal factions dictate the rules. Inaugurated in 1970, El Rodeo was designed to house about 1,500 prisoners. Over the years, however, the prison population exploded, reaching alarming numbers. It is estimated that over 5,000 inmates are currently confined within its overcrowded facilities. Imagine a space designed for a few hundred people now housing almost 4 times more inmates. The cells are so overcrowded that many prisoners sleep in makeshift tents in the corridors or in open spaces, exposed to suffocating heat and lack of hygiene. In El Rodeo, the real power lies in the hands of criminal factions. Organized groups like El Tren de Aragua and others control entire pavilions, imposing their own laws and punishments. Guards, bribed or intimidated, often limit themselves to watching the external gates. Violence in El Rodeo is a constant. Armed conflicts between rival factions are common, resulting in massacres that leave dozens dead in a few hours. Firearms, knives, and even grenades are used in bloody battles that put all inmates at risk. Hunger and malnutrition are another hallmark of El Rodeo. Many prisoners depend on relatives to bring basic food, like rice and beans. Those without external support face days without eating, leading to malnutrition and, in some cases, death. Hygiene conditions in El Rodeo are disastrous. The cells don't have functional bathrooms, and prisoners are forced to use buckets as toilets. The lack of potable water and adequate sewage systems turns the prison into an unsanitary environment prone to the spread of diseases. Former inmates recount horror stories about their experiences in El Rodeo. Some mention witnessing summary executions, torture, and even cannibalism in moments of extreme desperation. Others describe how life inside the prison is a daily struggle for survival. Over the years, Venezuelan authorities promised improvements, but no significant measures were implemented. The country's economic and political crisis makes it even harder to invest in prison infrastructure or ensure minimum security. El Rodeo gained international notoriety in 2011, when a violent riot resulted in clashes between rival factions and a military intervention. For days, the world watched in horror as images of bodies being removed from the prison circulated in the media. The existence of a prison like El Rodeo reflects not only failures in the judicial system but also deep social and economic problems. Poverty, corruption, and the lack of opportunities push thousands of people into crime, perpetuating the cycle of violence. While La Sabanita also suffers from chaos and anarchy, El Rodeo stands out for the extreme level of armed violence and the powerful influence of criminal factions. Both, however, share the same core problem: the absence of state control. To this day, El Rodeo remains one of the most dangerous prisons in the world. Despite some intervention attempts, conditions remain inhumane, and internal conflicts continue to claim lives. Now that we've explored El Rodeo, let's move on to another equally dangerous prison: Goulburn Prison in Australia, known for its historical brutality and severe punitive methods during the 19th century. A place that marked the beginning of the modern era of the prison system. Our next destination takes us to the past, to Goulburn Prison, one of the most notorious institutions of the Australian colonial era. Located in New South Wales, this prison symbolizes the beginning of modern prison brutality, where prisoners were treated like slaves and subjected to exhausting forced labor. Founded in 1819, Goulburn Prison was built as part of the British penal system in Australia. During the 19th century, thousands of prisoners, many convicted of minor crimes in England, were sent to penal colonies like Goulburn as a form of punishment and exploitation. The prison was designed to be an impenetrable fortress, with high stone walls and tiny cells that barely allowed movement. Conditions were so dire that many prisoners died from intense cold, hunger, or diseases. Prisoners in Goulburn were forced to perform exhausting physical labor, such as building roads, bridges, and buildings. These tasks were performed under armed surveillance, and any attempt to rest or resist was punished with whippings or solitary confinement. Physical punishment was a common practice in Goulburn. Prisoners received daily whippings as a form of control and punishment. In some cases, the marks of these punishments remained for the rest of their lives, serving as a constant reminder of their suffering. Beyond punishing criminals, the colonial prison system had a clear objective: to exploit free labor. The prisoners of Goulburn directly contributed to the development of Australian infrastructure but never received any recognition or compensation. Diaries and records of former prisoners reveal devastating stories about their experiences in Goulburn. Many mention constant hunger, lack of adequate clothing for the cold climate, and daily humiliation imposed by the guards. The inhumane conditions in Goulburn resulted in high mortality rates among prisoners. Diseases like tuberculosis, dysentery, and pneumonia spread rapidly due to overcrowding and lack of medical care. Goulburn Prison is often cited as a clear example of how the colonial system used incarceration as a tool of oppression. The exploitation of prisoners and institutionalized brutality shaped the modern prison system in various parts of the world. The existence of a prison like Goulburn raises important questions about the role of the penal system in society. Did these institutions really seek to rehabilitate individuals, or were they just ways to perpetuate exploitation and control over vulnerable populations? While contemporary prisons like El Rodeo are marked by chaos and anarchy, Goulburn represents the organized and systematic brutality of a colonial era. Both, however, share the same core problem: the dehumanization of prisoners. Although Goulburn Prison was decommissioned long ago, its remnants can still be found in the town of Goulburn, now transformed into museums and historical monuments. These sites serve as somber reminders of the past and warnings about the dangers of inhumane prison systems. The history of Goulburn profoundly influenced literature and cinema about the prison system. Books and films depicting colonial brutality often draw inspiration from the inhumane conditions faced by prisoners of that era. Now that we've explored Goulburn, Let's move on to our final prison on this list. Camp Delta in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. A place that remains a symbol of global controversy due to its practices of indefinite detention and torture. Our final destination is Camp Delta, located at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba. This prison is one of the most controversial places in the world, where the limits of international law are constantly tested. Here, the concept of justice is redefined or simply ignored. Established in 2002 by the U.S. government as part of the so-called War on Terror, Camp Delta was designed to house terrorism suspects captured in different parts of the world. Over the years, it has become synonymous with indefinite detention and extreme interrogation practices. The prison is divided into several cell blocks, each with different levels of restriction. The cells are small, with steel walls and bars, and inmates often remain isolated for 22 hours a day, without access to natural light or meaningful social interaction. One of the most shocking aspects of Camp Delta is that many detainees have never been formally charged or tried. They remain imprisoned for years, sometimes decades, without knowing when or if they will be released. This raises fundamental questions about respect for the rule of law. Reports from former prisoners and leaked documents reveal that torture techniques like waterboarding, prolonged sleep deprivation, and exposure to extreme temperatures were routinely used to extract information. These practices were widely condemned as violations of human rights. In addition to physical forms of torture, inmates in Camp Delta suffer from severe psychological punishments. Continuous loud music, prolonged isolation, and public humiliation are used to break their mental resistance. Former prisoners recount devastating stories about their experiences in Camp Delta. Many mention being pushed to the brink of madness by inhumane conditions and constant abuse. Some claim they still carry deep trauma even after being released. One of the most concerning characteristics of Camp Delta is the lack of transparency. U.S. authorities maintain strict control over information about the prison, making it difficult to verify actual conditions inside. Visits from family members and independent inspectors are practically non-existent. Human rights organizations, such as Amnesty International and the UN, have repeatedly criticized the practices in Camp Delta. They argue that the prison violates basic human rights principles and represents a stain on the reputation of the United States as a global defender of freedom. The existence of a prison like Camp Delta raises important questions about balancing national security and individual rights. To what extent is it acceptable to suspend laws and ethical norms in the name of protection against threats? And do these measures really contribute to global security? While Black Dolphin and ADX Florence are also known for their extreme isolation, Camp Delta stands out for the complete suspension of legal and humanitarian rights. All, however, share the same core problem: reducing human beings to something less than dignified. Despite promises of closure by several U.S. governments, Camp Delta remains operational to this day. Hundreds of prisoners still await trial or are held without formal charges, perpetuating a cycle of uncertainty and suffering. The history of Camp Delta has inspired films, documentaries, and books that explore the moral and legal complexities involved. These works help keep the discussion alive about the limits of punishment and human rights. Exploring these 10 prisons leads us to deeply reflect on the role of the prison system in society. Whether through overcrowding, extreme violence, or human rights violations, each challenges us to ask, what is the true purpose of punishment? And how can we create systems that are more just and humane?